Shot got blocked by Theodore, and he springs Neal to center. Neal weaving right, up to the blue line, has two men with him to the right side. Howard gets down low. He scores! Eric Howell wins it! 2-1 Knights with 4:37 left in the second overtime. Team steal to Eric Howell, and the Knights take a 2-0 series lead.
Yes. Did you stay up for that one last night when the late game goes to double overtime? And you start feeling like maybe during the intermission it's time to go to sleep. Maybe you change the channel, see what else is on. Maybe there's a rerun of Seinfeld somewhere. You watch that. All of a sudden you realize, oh no, am I missing something? You go back and you catch the game-winning goal as, the Vegas Golden Knights, that is something. As they take a 2-0 series lead over the LA Kings. And that was an exciting game. We've had two exciting, very low-scoring games. What have we had? 4 total goals between the Vegas Golden Knights and the LA Kings in 2 games. And as I was saying before, that is the series I would most like to cover. LA, Vegas, back and forth. I could get on board with that. They're fairly close together. The weather is very good. The party scene is very good in both those cities. Those are the only things that I care about. My name is Conor McKenna. This is Hockey Primetime. Welcome to the show. Nice to be with you. We're back on Saturday.
Yay.
That is the voice of Laura Saba. Laura's the producer of the program. She has booked all the guests and come up with much of the stuff that we're going to be talking about here today. So basically what I'm trying to say is if the show is bad, you can hit her up. She's on Twitter at The Active Stick. I am on Twitter as well. And we would love to hear from you, unless you're one of those people who like saying terrible things to people on Twitter. In that case, please don't. Yes, the Winnipeg Jets, one of 2 teams that have a 2-0 series lead. And I'd say the less surprising of the two, given the injury situation. I don't know how many of us gave the Minnesota Wild much of a chance in this series. But they made a game of it there yesterday. But yes, the Winnipeg Jets, and they're getting the job done. Not only do they now have the first win in franchise history, they got the second win in franchise history last night, going back to their days as the Atlanta Thrashers. And that was a nice thing to get that monkey off their back with the first win the other night. And you know how much this can be worth, what's going on right now. And you don't want to write anybody off. And you'll do so at your own peril at this time of year, right? You don't want to say the Minnesota Wild are done necessarily, but you watch game 1 of that series and the whiteout there in Winnipeg, and kind of weird that they don't wear white jerseys when that's going on. But anyway, the whiteout's happening, and the Minnesota Wild, they had them, right? They had a 2-1 lead in that game in Winnipeg and a chance to really take the wind out of the sails of not just the Jets, but their fan base. And, well, lo and behold, up comes Patrick Laine, and the rest is history. But I wonder if the Minnesota Wild won't look back on that as sort of, that was their chance to make a series of it, and they weren't able to do it. And now the Jets have a 2-0 series lead. And looking at this Jets team, and it's nice to have a chance to talk about them. We don't give a whole lot of attention to them, and we're going to talk a lot about them today during the course of the show between now and 3 o'clock when we take you to live coverage of the Stanley Cup playoffs. I basically, looking at the Jets, there's 2 things that I wonder about with the Jets. Actually, maybe 3 things. The first thing is Dustin Byfuglien. And he had a great game last night. He was terrific. And did you see that hit that he threw on Mikko Koivu? And it doesn't happen all the time, but that was an example of a hit that turned the tide of the hockey game. He crushed him. And you got to love a hit like that. And that's Dustin Byfuglien at his best. Dustin Byfuglien setting up a goal in that game as well. That's Byfuglien at his best. Byfuglien at his worst is taking terrible penalties. We saw him take a bad one in game 1 of the series, and it didn't end up costing them too dearly. But I was a little bit worried about a team that relies as much as they do on Dustin Byfuglien, just because he can make bad decisions when it comes to taking penalties, going for hits when he should be worrying about the puck, and maybe letting his emotions get the best of him sometimes. But he was at his best yesterday, and now they're up 2-0. But I do wonder, when it comes to the Jets and the Predators, if that is what we're going to get, and we're certainly headed that way, if you're leaning on Dustin Byfuglien and you look at that blue line in Nashville, that's tough. So that's reason number one. Reason number two why I wonder about the Winnipeg Jets is the Connor Hellebuyck factor. Connor Hellebuyck is great. He's got the most wins of any U.S.-born goaltender in NHL history and in a single season, and that's great. And he's been good in the series so far. But can he keep it going? And we don't know. We haven't seen Connor Hellebuyck win a playoff series before. He's ahead of the 8 ball as it stands right now. But is he going to be able to keep it up? He's young. He's inexperienced, and that is why I do wonder about that. Again, I'm not wondering if they're going to beat Minnesota. I have no doubt about that. And the last one is just the team tends to, and it's been less true this year than it was last year, but bad penalties. Taking a lot of bad penalties, this can cost you a playoff series at times. And we'll see if this happens. Again, I have no doubt that they're going to be able to get through the first round, but they're going to run it in Nashville in the second round, assuming everything goes as we expected it to go. But yeah, we've got bad blood in the series now. Did you hear the news? Bruce Boudreau came out and said it's we've got bad blood. It's bad blood, and he was actually blasting in the background the Taylor Swift song of that name and doing a dance routine set to it. You know the song, right? So yeah, that part is not true. He was not doing a dance routine set to Bad Blood by Taylor Swift, but he says it's a rivalry now. And we'll see. Wait, you listen. The series is not over until you lose a game at home, and the series shifts to Minnesota for Game 3 tomorrow. But as it stands right now, the Jets have to be thrilled with the way things are going. And Bruce Boudreau and his team, it's tough. Boudreau's got this reputation for always losing in the playoffs, but he got Winnipeg. That's a really good team.
It's a bad draw. It's a tough draw. And this series has been way more exciting than I expected it to be. We don't talk about Minnesota a lot. Sometimes it's hard to decide what the identity of that team is. But and coming in, I was excited to watch Winnipeg, but I was like, but then I have to watch Minnesota. The series has been really compelling, and so far it's only been 2 games, but I'm excited about this bad blood they're talking about, to be honest.
Yes, it's good. We love bad blood. I'm not, as long as I'm not getting cross-checked in the head, or Nazem Kadri's not taking a run at me while I'm on my knees, prone, facing the boards, then I'm perfectly fine with bad blood. And I think that's the thing. We sometimes make the mistake, and I think we would be making a mistake to write off the Minnesota Wild right now. I think they could maybe nick a game or 2 in this series, but ultimately a best of 7. So it's so rare that the better team does not win over that many games. I think even if you're a Wild fan, you would admit Winnipeg does have a sort of a stronger hockey team, and they can come at you in waves with all those lines. And they've got Patrik Laine, who is looking pretty good in the Stanley Cup playoffs, and really, really exciting to see a young guy. He's still 19 years old, Patrik Laine, and what a character he is. So we'll have more on him during the course of the show today. But the other big story for me in the Stanley Cup playoffs so far has got to be George Parros. George Parros, who is the man at the soup kitchen known as the NHL Department of Player Safety, who ladles out steaming hot portions of justice and serves them up. I don't know if justice is the right word, but discipline anyway. And if you're a Leafs fan, you got to be
steamed.
Steamed?
Yeah.
You think so?
Well, I think, it's not that Kadri did not deserve a suspension. It's that, in context, usually in the playoffs, they're a lot more lenient.
Don't forget that Nazem Kadri has a lengthy history of disciplinary measures being taken against him in the National Hockey League. I believe that's the 4th time that he's been suspended. And who knows what's going on with Tommy Wingels, which I'll get to in a second. Wingels is the guy that Kadri hit. Kadri gets three games. I got to say, I thought he was going to get 1. Maybe he would get 2. I definitely didn't think he would get 3. But if I look at look, I'm not a Leafs fan, so and again, I'm not cheering for I'm not a Bruins fan either. I don't care who wins that series. I have no stake in that whatsoever. And frankly, I'd rather Kadri's playing. I think it's a better series if he's there. But looking at the situation, looking at that hit, and where Tommy Wingels is in that situation, and the fact that Kadri then after the game comes out and says he took a run at Mitch Marner, I decided basically to get revenge on him. I know I'm paraphrasing here, but if you're making, this is a soft pitch right up the middle for George Parros to knock. And if ever you were going to claim that there's some sort of a bias against, or I would say a bias towards the Toronto Maple Leafs, the league office in Toronto, they're all Leafs fans, they're always rooting for the Leafs. Well, I don't think George Parros is rooting for the Toronto Maple Leafs. However, don't forget that there are always conspiracy theories about the Boston Bruins and the Jeremy Jacobs, and the fact that the league always takes it easy on one of their favorite owners. Now, I don't believe that for a millisecond. Well, I believe it for a second, but I believe it for a millisecond, but not a full second. Let me put it to you that way. I think that George Parros is trying to make a point. Drew Doughty gets a game. And again, Kadri is a star player. I think it's not crazy to say the guy scored 30 goals this year. He is a very, very good player and a super important player for the Leafs if they're going to want to make a series of this against the Bruins. And he gets 3 games. And don't forget that one of, if not the most recognizable player on the LA Kings also got a game in a situation that was, I'd say, a little bit, certainly a lot more debatable than the Kadri hit on Wingels was. But Doughty gets a game, and he missed it last night, and the Kings missed him. Was that the difference between a 1-1 series? We'll never know. But you'd have to think that was a possibility. But I think that George Parros is coming out and he's trying to make a point. He is trying to make it clear to guys, and this is an opportunity to do it, that there's going to be a certain standard in these Stanley Cup playoffs when it comes to cheap shots. And you have to remember this, right? Parros knows this. It's not like they make these decisions on the spur of the moment. They calculate them. They really think about them long and hard. They think about the implications, and then they do it. And Kadri getting 3 games for that hit after the first game of the Stanley Cup playoffs means that anybody who does something similar throughout the rest of the tournament is going to suffer a similar punishment. And if they don't, then the scrutiny is going to be there in a really, really big way. And the criticism is going to show up there as well. It's going to be fascinating to see how players respond to this. And if players respond to this and maybe try to tone it down a little bit. Because you look at Kadri, and we've seen this from the guy before, as we were saying, he's a terrific player. I think one of his problems is, and there's a lot of guys like this in the National Hockey League, and he admitted it really after the game, I think inadvertently, that he loses control sometimes of his emotions. The old count to 10 when you get angry before you react thing. He maybe could use a little bit of that. He sees Marner get hit, his boy, his line mate, his brother in arms, and it's just revenge. And in that moment, you have to be smarter than that. You have to try to check yourself. Easier said than done, and easy for a guy like me to say watching from home. But anyway, the tournament's been pretty good so far. Are you happy after 3 days? I'm pretty excited. What do we have coming up at 3 o'clock for you here today? We have a matinee for you. It's the Stanley Cup playoffs. Why are there 2 games at 3 o'clock? Can somebody explain this to me?
It could have been staggered. There's the next game is at 8 o'clock. So I feel like we should have had a whole day of hockey. Yes. Personally, that is my opinion.
Right. So what game do we have at 3 o'clock?
We have the Avs at Nashville.
Avs at Nashville. All right. So we'll see if they can make one of it. Listen, we saw the Flyers do it last night. Did you write off the Flyers?
I
after
totally
the
did. I have to admit, I absolutely did.
Now it's a best of 5, and they've got 3 of them in Philadelphia, right? So that could be good. It's definitely. I think the key thing is not to write teams off, and everybody's guilty of doing this. In the first round of the playoffs, in the first game, every year you watch one game and you're like, that team's done. Forget it. They got nothing. And then lo and behold, the Flyers show up and stick it to the Pittsburgh Penguins. And boy, oh boy, did Claude Giroux run over Chris Letang in that game yesterday. Sidney Crosby calling for a suspension. I don't think there's going to be one forthcoming, but it doesn't hurt to ask, I guess. That would certainly change the complexion of the series if he was out. But yeah, the Flyers are alive and well, and we're going to be chatting about them in just a moment. Dave Haxtell is a genius. You didn't think that they should go to Peter Mrazek in goal for Game 2, did you? After the way Brian Elliott played in Game 1. Yeah, admit it. You did. You thought that. We all thought that. Dave Hakstol did not. He stuck to his guns, and he comes out to smelling like roses. Let's talk to Dave Isaac of the South Jersey Courier-Post. We've only had him on the show like 15 times. I'm sure I'll figure it out at some point. But, yeah, no bad blood between Dave and I. He's going to be joining us in just a few moments. This is Hockey Primetime. I'm Conor McKenna. Happy Saturday. I hope you're enjoying the Stanley Cup playoffs. We'll be back right after this.
Set it up, and Cross-ice pass was intercepted. Crosby a breakaway, all alone on Elliott. Crosby beaten by Elliott. He's got it in the club, his biggest save of the game, and Elliott shuts down the highest scorer in the playoffs right now.
Yes, Brian Elliott. We all knew that he was going to bounce back and have a great performance, right? No, not me. I was like, are you crazy, Dave Hakstol? Why would you commit right after the game? He didn't commit right after the game, but he certainly showed that he was inclined to return to Brian Elliott after the 7-0 loss in Game 1. Was it 7-0? Am I screwing this up? No. 7-0. And I'm like, whoa, sleep on it at least. But no, he knew. Trust your instincts. Dave Hakstol, clearly a genius. With more on the Flyers, who are now tied 1-1 in their series against the Pittsburgh Penguins. A pleasure to welcome back to the show, covering the series for the South Jersey Courier-Post, Dave Isaac. Hello.
Hey, Connor. Thanks for having me. How are you?
I'm doing all right, man, and thanks for making time for us. Not a bad playoff series to be covering, and the travel is very manageable as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it all depends on your method, I guess. I've been driving since 6:15 this morning, so after just covering practice, I'd hesitate to call it easy, but I'm going to go home and nap after this.
All right, then. That doesn't sound pleasant at all. So, what were you thinking when you hear Dave Haxtell say that, again, he didn't commit to it, but he certainly made it seem like he was going to stick with Brian Elliott. Did you think that was the right move after game one?
I think that this was one of those cases where they really didn't have any terrific options. They didn't have a great option, and I don't even know that call this a good option, but it probably was their best, just because Brian Elliott so clearly looked shaky. Certainly in game one when he allowed 5 goals on 19 shots, and even in the last 2 preseason games, the last 2 regular season games, which were kind of garbage time against non-playoff teams. The Rangers basically had their American League team in the lineup, so there wasn't a whole lot there where you say, oh, yeah, he looks solid, he's our guy. But you saw what Peter Mrazek had done recently, and you say, well, you know what? Brian Elliott provides a leadership aspect to this team where even though he hadn't looked very comfortable, the team seems to be more comfortable when he's behind them. So I think he kind of only had the one choice, and certainly it paid off there. And there have been times this season where Dave Haxtell has made stubborn moves, and it hasn't worked out. So I can't say I was shocked by this, but obviously it worked very well in his favor.
It really has, and that's it. That's why he's the one calling the shots. He's had an interesting season, hasn't he, Haxtell? Sort of up and down. If memory serves, the Flyers got off to kind of a terrible start, and they were sort of being written off. I think people were chanting "Fire Haxtell," right, in Philadelphia, and well, he's come out of it looking all right.
Yeah, they started pretty okay, and then from mid-November to mid-December, they had that 10-game losing streak, right. And I think it was game number 10. It was the last one at home when people were starting those chants, and I don't think that there was ever really a chance of that happening, but when you hear thousands of people chanting it in the stands, you start to wonder a little bit whether that could really happen, and then the Flyers went out on the road to a Western Canada road trip and swept it. With 3 wins. So that was really the turning point of the season. And yeah, you're right. Dave Haxtell has kind of had an up and down year, in my opinion, because he's made some really smart looking moves in terms of putting Claude Giroux on the left wing, and Sean Couturier flourishes as the number 1 center. And I think that a large part of that is because Giroux was on his wing, pulling some strings later on to have Travis Konechny go up on that line and be the right winger with them. And he had 20 goals in 40 something games. And obviously he looked like a star. And then there have been times where he's put guys out there late in games and it's killed them. And he relies on veterans, and this is a young Flyers team, and I completely understand relying on veterans, but there have been times when the older guys, the more experienced guys have burned them because they haven't been able to get the job done. So for that reason, I think, yeah, you're right. It's been kind of up and down for Dave Haxtell, but certainly up again after last night.
And now we've got a series on our hands. Best of 5, the series shifts back to Philadelphia. And we've heard a lot of complaining about officiating in this series already. In the first game, the Flyers maybe not thrilled with the amount of penalties and the circumstances. After the last game, there was some complaints as well, including Sidney Crosby saying that he believes that Claude Giroux should be suspended for running into Chris Letang. And I don't know how many people agree with that, although that was a very hard collision. Hard to believe that that would be something the league would suspend. What do you make of the gripes against officiating on either side, and are they legit?
Well, I think if you look at a replay of that hit, Sidney Crosby wasn't even watching it, so I'm not so sure how he came to that conclusion.
Because he doesn't want the best player in the world, Dave. He's scared of the best player in the world. He wants him suspended.
Well, Dave Haxtell's done some bold things, but I don't know if you remember Peter Laviolette's line there and called Drew the best player in the world. Yeah, I think certainly there have been some questionable calls, and one of the Flyers was kind of talking about that today, how last night I think it was a little bit chippier than the first game, and it was pretty clear that they weren't calling the retaliatory stuff. They were only calling the guy who gets the first shot in. So it'll be interesting to see if that kind of officiating continues as the series shifts to Philadelphia here. But the Flyers really helped themselves yesterday as well with some strong penalty killing, because the Penguins had ample opportunities on the power play, and that's the number 1 power play in the league. So certainly there weren't as many complaints as maybe there would have been if that game was a little bit closer from the Flyers standpoint. I guess I'm not even 100% sure of the rules. If the officials travel and do that whole series, Wes McCauley and Tim Peel were the referees last night. Those two in particular are kind of the names that are maybe the most popular among NHL officials, and sometimes for different reasons. But it'll be interesting to see how they continue calling this series if they are indeed the ones out there on Sunday afternoon.
What did you think of the Giroux-Letang? Excuse me, the Giroux-Letang. I don't know if we can even call it a hit, maybe more of a collision. What did you make of it?
Yeah, it was kind of strange because Crosby goes to hit Giroux there, and there's no question that Giroux looks over his shoulder and sees a body and sees that it's in a Penguins uniform. And I don't know if it was if he had enough time to recognize exactly who it was, but he definitely saw somebody there. And the way that Crosby kind of hit him, he's a little bit off balance. I don't really understand what he was supposed to do there to avoid a collision with Letang. And when you look at this several different replay angles, what was Letang doing there? The puck had already gone. It looked like he had just picked his head up and didn't realize that there was a collision right in front of him. So obviously you can't put all of that on Letang, but I also don't know what Claude Giroux was supposed to do in that scenario, off balance, just having Sidney Crosby's right shoulder put into his chest.
You can't help when you see that happen, and I'm inclined to agree with you. There can't be any discipline for that, and there won't be any discipline for that. It's just but it was a hard lick that Letang took, and he left for a while. Isn't that weird? Did you get any kind of an explanation for that, like blood on the palm of his hand?
No, I haven't heard anything on that. And we've kind of tried to dissect that replay, and I don't know if he, the way that he fell awkwardly, if he somehow got his own skate blade in there. I don't think it was Giroux's foot, because that's what I was looking for, and it just wasn't anywhere near the vicinity of the hand for it to be him. So I don't know if it was his own blade or what it was there, but that did seem like a strange outcome from that collision, and it sounds like he was not on the ice today for Penguins practice, and it's been reported that was a maintenance day. So it'll be interesting if that was an upper body maintenance day or a lower body maintenance day.
Yeah, well, of course, this is Chris Letang's first playoff series in almost 2 years, so it's a big deal for sure. And as you mentioned, maintenance day today for Letang, and we know he doesn't just have a concussion history. I mean, he's got a lengthy concussion history, and I can't help, and I'm no doctor, and I'm no brain expert, but that's the C word is the first thing I think of when I see that hit. But let's not get bogged down in armchair diagnoses. It's game number 3 coming up tomorrow. The series shifts to Philadelphia, and I can't help but also think of the regular season, Dave, when the Penguins beat the Flyers 4 times. They scored 20 goals on them in those 4 games. I mean, that was a massive monkey the Flyers got off their back last night, wasn't it?
Absolutely, and the fact that it happened in Pittsburgh as well, it being game 2, it's just such a big difference. Every game 2, in my mind, is one of them, probably the most important in the series, because one team is either falling down 2-0 or gets to even the series, and that just becomes such a huge difference one way or another. And the Flyers haven't been a fantastic home team either, so I think that it was very important for that to happen for the Flyers on the road. But yeah, it does seem like an anomaly when you look at 6 games that they've played against the Penguins now, and they had scored 5+ in every one of them except for yesterday. So the Flyers wanted to say that game 1 was an anomaly. Well, they're going to have to prove that game 2 was not an anomaly.
And so I guess the next question is, what is the Flyers' path to victory? Short of the easy answer, score more goals than the Penguins. What's the scenario in which the Flyers pull off the massive upset of the 2-time defending champs? Well,
they certainly got a little bit of luck on their side yesterday. I mean, how many times is Sidney Crosby going to miss an empty net like that? Patrick Hornquist hit the post twice. Crosby hit the crossbar once. And those 2 players were very frustrated, and so was Evgeny Malkin. And for them now to have to come into Philadelphia, which has always been a hostile building for Pittsburgh, it'll be interesting to see if the Flyers can keep them frustrated. The Flyers can keep talking about how they want to focus on themselves, but if Pittsburgh can get upset and their stars seem rattled, that's going to be their best chance to win, in my opinion. And they don't seem too worried about that, but I think there's probably also a level of them playing coy. And if they see an opportunity to get an extra little shove in there, or if they notice Crosby smashing his stick over the crossbar and throwing it on the ice as he leaves, then there's probably a little bit of a mental advantage that they think they have at that time.
Sidney Crosby having a temper tantrum? No, never. Hey, Dave, thanks for your time, bud. I appreciate it. Get some rest. You got a big couple of weeks ahead of you.
All right, thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
Cheers. That's Dave Isaac from the South Jersey Courier-Post covering the Philadelphia Flyers and their series against the Pittsburgh Penguins. That's 1-1. And I don't have the schedule in front of me, but I'm going to go ahead and throw it out that it's tomorrow afternoon, right? Obviously. What do we have going on today? The Avalanche and the Predators coming up at 3 o'clock, and so are the Devils and Lightning. If you had to, Laura, gun to your head, which game do you watch? Nashville. Really, eh? Laura says Nashville. I guess in both these situations, these are teams, and Dave was just talking about the importance of game twos in these series. The Avalanche and the Devils got to do something. If they don't win, they've got to be in those games. Neither team was really in game one of their series. The big one is tonight, 8 o'clock. What? Between the Leafs and Bruins? What are we doing here? 8 o'clock start on a Saturday night. This is sacrilege. Why does NBC get to make this decision? Makes no sense to me. There's going to be way more people watching in Canada. Saturday night, it's a 7 o'clock start in this country. I am not going to stand for this. I am marching to the NHL offices to protest this 8 o'clock start between the Leafs and the Bruins. Saturday night games should not start at 8 o'clock unless it's the Stanley Cup final. Stanley Cup final, I understand. They all start at 8 o'clock unless it's an afternoon game. I can get on board with that. But first round of the playoffs, Leafs, Bruins, it is something not right about the Leafs and Bruins playing at 8 o'clock, just period. And don't forget the nightcap tonight. And one to look forward to, another team that could be fighting for their lives if they don't get a win. The Anaheim Ducks and the San Jose Sharks. The Sharks took game one by a score of 3-0. And that's your late game today. So we've got a lot of games coming up. And for some reason, the league decided to have two of them on at the same time today. Coming up next, let's talk to Emily Kaplan. Not only did Emily spend most of the past week in Humboldt, Saskatchewan, she also spent some time in Winnipeg and wrote a terrific feature on Patrick Laine. Is that a feature? Maybe it's a profile of Patrick Laine. Just a great read. What a character this kid Patrick Laine is, and he's tearing it up in the Stanley Cup playoffs. We'll talk to Emily about Patrick Laine and more coming up next here. This is Hockey Primetime here on Sirius XM NHL Network Radio and streaming live on hockey.com. the greatest song of all time, and we might be watching one of the greatest goal scorers of all time, Patrik Laine. Not only does this guy score a lot of goals, he's also a tremendous character. Remember when he came out and he said he thought he was better than Austin Matthews before the draft? And everybody was like, oh, how dare you? How dare you think highly of yourself? This is hockey. And he doesn't seem to care about that. And Emily Kaplan has a terrific feature or profile of Patrik Laine. You can read in ESPN's National Hockey League coverage. And very, very cool to get the story behind that horrendous beard that I'm glad I now know why Patrik Laine has this beard, because it was actually inexplicable. If you put a helmet with horns on his head, he would look like somebody who would raid a village and set it on fire with that beard. Anyway, he is of Scandinavian, so it's not that much of a stretch. Although Vikings never actually wore those horned helmets. Did you know that? It's a myth. Emily Kaplan's with ESPN. She's also with us right now, and well, it's nice to welcome her back and to hear that voice again. Emily, how you doing?
I'm great, Connor. How's it going?
I'm doing great, and thanks for making time for us. I read the piece and on Patrik Laine. I loved it, and I urge people to go check it out at ESPN.com/NHL and their coverage of the National Hockey League. But what can you tell me? What is Patrik Laine like?
There's something incredibly precocious about him. I'm so endeared by his personality. He's 19 years old. He's going to be 20 later this month. But I've never met a 19-year-old that's just so comfortable in his own skin. He says what he means. He says he has this personal policy where he just doesn't feel like lying. It's kind of boring. He loves video games. He orders the same room service when he goes on the road every single time. His roommate, Nikolai Ehlers, sometimes they're in LA and he's like, dude, like, we got to go out and see some sun. But there's just something kind of incredibly charming about him. And that's kind of what I wanted to capture in the piece.
And yeah, I think you did a terrific job of that. And that room service order was what, a steak, medium, a Sprite, and was there something else? Fries. Wow, I'm kind of shocked that one of the best goal scorers in the NHL is scoffing fries and drinking Sprite every day. That seems crazy to me. How does he pull that off?
It's crazy, but it's not as crazy as Alexander Ovechkin's pregame meal, which is fettuccine Alfredo with like a really creamy sauce and chicken. So if Ovechkin can pull that off, I understand why Laine can pull off steak and fries.
That's wow.
Right.
Maybe that is the secret to being an elite goal scorer. These are the two best goal scorers in hockey, and eating stuff that you would normally, most mortals would think you shouldn't necessarily eat. I do wonder though, when Patrik Laine hits his 30s, if he's still going to be able to pull off the, based on personal experience, I do wonder if he's going to be able to pull off the Sprite and the fries. But anyway, and one of the other things you captured here in the piece is, and I didn't necessarily realize that he is such a, I knew he was a star in Finland, but he's a massive celebrity in that country, isn't he?
Yeah, so I was first kicked off to that earlier in the year. We had this kind of player media tour. I met guys from all different teams. And Tuukka Rask started talking about it. He was like, in Finland these days, like, the kids don't talk about Teemu Selanne anymore, and the kids don't want to be goalies anymore because, remember, for a really long time, Finland's just known for goalies. He's like, all they talk about is Laine. He's like a mainstream celebrity, paparazzi. So, like, a little, behind the scenes of even reporting this piece, it was funny because I wanted to go to Laine's apartment, and his agent pretty much like, look, he has no privacy when he goes out in Finland whatsoever. In Winnipeg, he can barely go in private. He just wants to do everything at the rink. Like, that's just kind of his policy, and you have to respect that because at 19, he's got that, paparazzi trail already.
One thing that I was saying this to Laura when we were talking about the piece before the show was, I'd love to meet his parents. I'd love to know what his parents are like, because I think when you meet somebody who's 19 who has that kind of that confidence and a no lying, kind of no BS policy that he seems to have, I'd be fascinated to know what his parents have to do with it. And there you go. His mother or father or both live with him in Winnipeg during the season, which was another interesting thing, which it makes sense. He's only 19. He's in a foreign country. It seems like his parents are kind of interesting and cool people as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And they both work blue-collar jobs back in Finland. I think they're kind of those kind of salt-of-the-earth people. But, yeah, I would love to meet them as well. It's another one of his policies. He kind of wants to keep his personal life separate.
Huh.
But also, I think, sometimes players are a little self-conscious of the fact they live with parents, and he's not at all. And it is pretty common. Austin Matthews' father lived with him his first year. His mother went to Switzerland with him. I think Mitch Marner lives with his mom in Toronto. But Patrick's like, yeah, honestly, like, I can't cook food for myself. I tried. I've sucked. I'm too lazy to learn how to make pasta. I need them to feed me.
Yeah, he's a 19-year-old kid. And I guess it's interesting too, right? Because he talks about, and you write about this, and again, don't think you're getting it all by hearing us talk about it. Go check out the piece at espn.com/NHL, Emily Kaplan on Patrick Laine. But he seems very down to earth, and he signs all the autographs. Anytime somebody asks him for an autograph, he'll sign it. Although he has a I'd rather not sign your skin policy as well, as you point out in the piece. But
Isn't
maybe
we all, though?
Oh, of course, yes. Well, I'm willing to make exceptions in certain situations, but maybe part of the reason he doesn't like going out is almost because of that. Like he tells you, right? People come to visit him, and he doesn't go out. He doesn't even show them the city. Like he won't even take them to the mall. And he mentions he doesn't want to sign 150 autographs. I guess that kind of makes sense, doesn't it?
It totally makes sense. And he was really funny because he has had a lot of visitors this year. He said, whether it's his own buddies back at home want to come see him, family, friends, family. And I was like, Patrick, like, what do you do with them? Like, do you take them to go see Winnipeg? And he's like, they'll want to do stuff, but I'll just want to hang out at the apartment.
And to be fair, and I apologize to the citizens of Winnipeg, but come on, it is Winnipeg. We're not talking about New York City here. This is anyway. And now cue the.
Well, that's another point of the story which I thought was interesting, because as you know, it kind of is the butt of all jokes, right? In hockey circles, Winnipeg, we say it's cold and dreary and a little provincial. And it seems just like the perfect fit for Patrick, though. And as he told me, look, I'm a simple guy, as we've illustrated earlier, in the talks about him. I don't need much. I love hockey. They care about hockey here. There's a rink. That's all that I need. It's a perfect city for me.
I'd say that's an excellent point. Yeah, the problem I have with Winnipeg, and I've never actually been there. It's just I understand from, I believe it was members of the LA Kings, that they don't have Wi-Fi in the hotels there. Right? No, I'm kidding.
Don't drag the Kings. It was the Stars.
It was the Stars? Oh, I apologize.
No, the San Jose Sharks. It was Thomas
the
Bertollet.
Sharks. I was in the right. I was in the right state. All right. And since I did mention it before, what is the story behind that ridiculous, preposterous, whatever you want to call it, that beard of his?
Yeah, I actually think it's a pretty adorable story. I guess it's a cousin back in Finland, and they just made a bet of could he do it or not. And so Patrick's like, yeah, I'm going to do it. And when I talked about a kid who's comfortable in his own skin, imagine every single day he goes into that Winnipeg Jets locker room and the guys just get on him. Andrew Kopp sits next to him. He's kind of a chirper, and every day he has a new insult. Like, you look like Sasquatch. You look like Abraham Lincoln. And all the guys just give Laine respect because as much as he gets it, he's just like, okay, I'm keeping it.
You know what I mean? I don't think it's the best, but now that I know that it's he's kind of making a point of it, and there's an anecdote in your piece about him asking the doctors to fix a cut on his face. Whatever you do, don't mess with the beard. I like that, and I got to give him respect. I don't think I could grow a beard like that. I'm 35 years old. I remember Sidney Crosby's facial hair in the early stages of his the Stanley Cup playoffs in his career. He'd grow that little ridiculous mustache. It was terrible. So I'll give Laine some credit. All right, with Emily Kaplan of ESPN, if we can change gears to really just a completely different topic, and I know that you were in Humboldt, Saskatchewan, Emily, for parts of the last week, following that horrible tragedy that occurred with the bus carrying the Humboldt Broncos and members of the team, broadcasters, coaches, and others. What can you tell me about your experience spending a few days in Humboldt on the heels of that tragedy?
Yeah, I hadn't really had time to process it. It's been a really awkward transition. I went right to Pittsburgh to cover the first round of the playoffs, but kind of now as I'm starting to reflect, I think as we start to talk about this tragedy, I don't think we're going to talk as much about the actual incident and the bus crash and the details of that. I think we're going to remember the response to it, both in honoring these boys who just loved hockey and loved to play, and this community, both very, very on a minor level, in Humboldt, and they're the salt of the earth people. And I can go on and on about their hospitality and their warmth. but also the hockey community and how we all kind of rallied around that. So that, I think, is what's going to shine through in this awful tragedy, and I hope we remember that.
And the GoFundMe page is still raising money, and it's a tough thing. It's I'm sure to be there, and I can't put myself in your shoes, but to be in a community like that in the aftermath of such a tragedy, it's tough, and it's a impressive job that you did. Conveying that and sort of portraying what it was like to be in that community, and what a community, right? And you and I spoke about this the other day, I know, but since we are on a different radio station, on a different show, the people in that community were amazing, weren't they?
Yeah, so we're probably going to talk about this $10 million or whatever amount it comes to for a very long time, but I just think of some small gestures that you saw in town. For example, we, the media, were there, right? There was one night we were working late. It was, I think, Monday night at 10 p.m. And a man just comes over and brings us this big pot of soup and was like, here, it's late. You guys need to eat. Thank you for being here and covering this. At the ice arena, which is kind of the epicenter of town. It's the community center. There's just boxes and boxes of food. The freezer is full with lasagnas. And some of it is donated by, people in town. I heard a lot of it was donated by other junior hockey teams. So that kind of warmth is what you see. And it was really inspiring.
Over $11.2 million now on the GoFundMe page, raised by over 127,000 people in the last 7 days. Emily, a pleasure as usual to chat with you. Such a fan of your work, and I hope we can do it again soon.
Thanks, Connor. That's
Emily Kaplan of ESPN, part of their outstanding team covering the National Hockey League, including Greg Wyshynski, Chris Peters, and others. And boy, do I go to ESPN for NHL coverage a heck of a lot more than I used to. Coming up next, did the Bruins potentially... No. Okay. I should have written this down. All right. Did Nazem Kadri do the Bruins a favor? I'm not talking about the 3 games he's going to miss. I'm talking about who he hit. We'll talk about that next. This is Hockey Primetime here on SiriusXM NHL Network Radio and streaming live at hockeyprimetime.com.
Well, initially, I mean, I just felt like he made contact with Mitchie's head to start, and I didn't see a call there, and he was turning up the wall, so I was committed to the hit, and then he ended up falling. I mean, it happened pretty quick, and then I think he was reaching for the puck, so I don't think I stuck my leg out or my arm out or whatever the case is, but I mean, it's in the hands of the NHL at this point.
Yeah, it was in the hands of the NHL. Somebody needs to advise Nazem Kadri to not say that. I honestly believe that he got an extra game for what he said there. If he just kept his mouth shut and said, "Oh, heat of the moment, didn't think it was that bad," blah, 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 2 games. But you get the extra one for basically admitting that it was a retaliatory hit for what Wingels had done to Marner moments before that. But he had committed to the hit. There was another stride or two after realizing that Wingels was down there on the ice. And George Parros making a statement. We talked about this in the first part of the show here today. I think he's trying to set the tone here and tell guys, hey, listen, we're not going to stand for this kind of stuff. If you're targeting guys' heads, if you're hitting guys in the head, if you're targeting opponents who are in vulnerable situations, we are going to do something about it. And they certainly did. 3 games for Kadri. That is a huge blow for the Toronto Maple Leafs as Game 2 looms in Boston at 8 o'clock tonight. Should be another good one. That was an entertaining game, especially the beginning. Boy, did those 2 teams come out of the gates flying there on Thursday night. But what happened to Tommy Wingels? Well, Wingels is having a therapy day. Couldn't we all use the therapy day from time to time? I try that sometimes with my boss. I'll be like, listen, I can't come in tomorrow. I got a therapy day. And he's like, what? No, you're going to work. Go to work. What's wrong with you? And I do. I go to work. But Tommy Wingels, I don't know what's going on. I'm not a doctor, but I do have a hot take for you here. And I'd be surprised if many Bruins fans disagree with this. And speaking of Bruins fans, you got to hear the Jack Edwards on the Nesson call of the hit. Him and his whoever his color guy is, they are angry about that hit from Nazem Kadri. But I got sidetracked because I started thinking about that. Right. So Tommy Wingels, if the Bruins, honestly, and I'm going to look at the Bruins depth chart, they don't have very many guys that are like not good on this team. And with all due respect to Tommy Wingels, if I'm a Bruins fan and I have to choose one guy to get hit in that situation, I'm probably going to choose Tommy Wingels. Why? I'll tell you why, because I got Ryan Donato waiting in the wings. If this is the situation here, that Ryan Donato plays if Tommy Wingels doesn't, and that was the situation, he skated on the left wing of the third line with Backus and Acciari. I should know this, and I don't. Anyway, if Wingels can't go, it's going to be Donato. Wouldn't you rather have Donato in the lineup than Tommy Wingels? It's very NHL to sort of give the veteran, put the veteran over the kid, and Donato's going to come in at some point and play for the Bruins. I'd be shocked if he doesn't. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. But up and down that lineup, if I'm going to remove one guy of the 12 forwards, I think Tommy Wingels would be the guy. And if you're asking a Bruins fan about the trade-off, Nazem Kadri for 3 games for Tommy Wingels, they'll take that every day of the week and twice on Sunday. Minute. That's a 30-goal scorer in Kadri and a guy who is going to hopefully shut down that ridiculous first line of the Bruins. At least he'll try at some point. He'll have a better chance to do it at home. Wow, what a performance for Patrice Bergeron, David Pastrnak, and Brad Marchand in Game 1. How do you stop those guys? But yeah, that's my hot take on it. Hit me up if you're a Bruins fan. Let me know if you disagree. Would you rather have Tommy Wingels out there than Ryan Donato? On the other side, we've got another full hour of the show coming up, and we're going to talk about all kinds of things, including an interesting approach from the Washington Capitals, who may have learned from their playoff failures in the past. We'll talk to Isabelle Khurshudyan about what they're doing that other teams are not. She's with the Washington Post, covering the Washington Capitals in their series against the Columbus Blue Jackets. How about that goal from Artemi Panarin the other day? We'll talk to Isabelle next. This is Hockey Primetime.
Beautiful. Hit the post.
his back and win the game, and he does it in overtime. And the Blue Jackets take a 1-0 lead in this best-of-7 series.
Yeah, wow, what a goal by Artemi Panarin. It did not seem like that was an angle that somebody could score from, but that's what Panarin does. What a player and what a story. If you haven't had a chance to read it yet, in The Athletic this week, Aaron Portzline wrote about Artemi Panarin's path to the National Hockey League from deep in the heart of Russia now to Columbus as a member of the Blue Jackets, setting a franchise record with 55 assists this year, 82 points. What a season. And he's carrying it over to the playoffs, much to the chagrin of the Washington Capitals, who trail the Columbus Blue Jackets 1-0 in their best-of-7 series. I'm Conor McKenna. This is Hockey Primetime. How you doing? Are you enjoying yourself? I'm having a reasonably good day. It's Saturday. We've got a whole bunch of hockey, including 2 games coming up later on today. And tomorrow it's the Blue Jackets and the Capitals, game number 2. The series will resume on Sunday. With more on that series and covering the Washington Capitals for the Washington Post, a pleasure to welcome back to the show, Isabelle Khurshudyan. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for making time for us here. And I was fascinated to read your piece about shot quality and as it regards to the Capitals' approach and how it sort of dates back to their playoff history and some of those devastating playoff losses that they've suffered. And I do want to get to that in a second. But before we do, the circumstances, and I do wonder about the perception outside of the locker room versus inside. For a lot of fans, for the media, you see the Capitals lose game 1 and you're like, oh yeah, here we go again. The Capitals are losing at home. Another team loses game 1 at home, probably less of a big deal than the Capitals, who are sort of saddled with these playoff failures. Is that at all prevalent in the locker room, or is that just an outside thing from your perspective?
No, I think the Caps seem pretty relaxed. I think they know that 5-on-5, they played pretty well. And the most disappointing part of that loss, the most damning part, is kind of their mental mistakes. Burakovsky chasing Jones behind the net and taking a penalty. And then, the Blue Jackets go and tie the game. Before that, Tom Wilson hits Weinberg in the corner. Probably not a hit he needs to make in that situation at that time of the game. Blue Jackets get power play and score there. I mean, it's just things like that where you think, this team should know better. They should be better than this. As Barry Trotz said, it's training camp day 1 kind of stuff. But that's also what's probably the easiest thing to correct. I thought they were overall better than the Blue Jackets and just made some really kind of silly mistakes that, rightfully cost them. So I think they feel fairly good about themselves that if they kind of get out of their own way, it should be a different result if they play mostly like they did the other night. But here they go again was literally the headline in the Washington Post the day after the game.
And speaking of the Washington Post, at WashingtonPost.com or in print, you can read Isabelle's work covering the Capitals. And as we referenced a few moments ago, and I know it published earlier this week, but your piece about shot quality, and I did not know, I was completely unaware of, and the fact that the Capitals took the fewest shots in the league this season. That's a crazy stat, isn't it?
Yeah, considering that, at 5-on-5, I think they only scored 1 fewer goal than they did last season. And you look back to some of the guys they lost. I think they lost 60 goals of production from 3 forwards. And that was Marcus Johansson, Justin Williams, and Daniel Winnick. And, the guys they replaced, those players with were, someone like Jacob Verona, rookie, Devontae Smith-Pelly, kind of a bargain, depth addition, Alex Chason, same thing. So, 49 goals from Ovechkin helped. But, other guys had kind of rough years. It wasn't a great year for Backstrom, and it wasn't really a good year for TJ Oshie compared to last season. So, it kind of intrigued me that there had to be something they were doing, that the volume was so low. But I just don't believe there's an accident that, you know, your shooting percentage is that high throughout the season.
And the result of this is that the stats types look at the underlying numbers and see that, well, the Capitals aren't dominating based on the metrics that we're using. But yet here they are. They win the Metropolitan Division for the third year in a row. As you write in your piece, 3.12 goals a game. That's the 9th best offense in the National Hockey League. And is this the result of a concerted effort to go for quality over quantity when it comes to shots?
Yeah, they say so. I mean, look, some of this is, you know, their, you know, shot attempt percentage, Corsi for percentage. It's not going to be great because they had some defense issues. They're giving up a lot. That is absolutely true. But I think the Caps also have taken on this mindset of let's not waste shots. I don't think they, you know, like intentionally overpass sometimes. And, you know, they take it to an extreme at other times, but also think back to, you know, some of those past series, you know, Pittsburgh last year, Montreal, you know, back in 2010, where they were throwing a lot of shots at the net, and you kind of give the goalie confidence. And, you know, Braden, Holtby, and Philip Grubauer, when I talked to them for the story, they both said the same thing. So a goalie loves seeing a lot of pucks, and especially if they're not that hard to stop. And especially in that playoff series against Pittsburgh last year, the Penguins were vastly out-attempted by the Capitals, but kind of the shots that Holtby was seeing, it was a lot of laterals. You know, they would come really fast, and they would be the really high-quality chances. And the way the Caps are looking at quality isn't just location and angle on the ice, which is a lot of what we refer to as high-danger shots when they're, you know, off natural stature like a Corsica. It's looking at location. But, you know, now there's kind of more proprietary stuff out there that, you know, tracks the path of the puck, right? Was it a pass across the crease? You know, was it a clear-sided shot? Was there a screen? They're judging the quality that way, and they're trying to kind of create more situations that they can get more of those kind of scoring chances rather than just the volume, which, like I said, can give a goalie confidence. It can backfire on you.
It's it really is a fascinating thing, and I do wonder if we're going to see this sort of carry over, because it's almost like we have here in Montreal under Claude Julien's system, and I think it was similar in Boston, that it's really the opposite. It seems like it's just throw everything at the net, and as you write there, Isabelle, it's right. It's the old wisdom of more shots, more chances, more goals, obviously, but the numbers that you quote in your piece here really sort of back up the opposite. The Capitals are 6th from the bottom when it comes to is it even strength shot attempts when the game is close, and they scored one fewer goal than they did last year. So something is working, and it's kind of a crazy season for the Capitals, isn't it? You mentioned that Nicholas Backstrom has had kind of an off year. Braden Holtby has been really, well, I guess maybe the worst season of his career, and they lost all the guys that you mentioned, but here they are winning the division. It's kind of an amazing thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. You know, they've had kind of different kind of heroes. You know, I think Lars Eller was, you know, while TJ Oshie's having, you know, 20-game droughts here and there, and Backstrom's Backstrom was still good, but just wasn't as good as we've seen him, you know, the past couple of years. There was kind of Lars Eller, you know, quietly having one of the best seasons of his career and, you know, chipping in. Ovechkin's resurgence was really important. John Carlson had the best season of his career, and I think he finished the leading scorer among defensemen. And they needed that. They needed those, you know, kind of that production from the back end, just because some of their forwards were a little quiet. And then, you know, you have Holtby struggling, and then there's, you know, Philip Grubauer, who was one of the best goalies in the league since late November. Had like a .930 save percentage and a 1.9 goals against average. So on the one hand, like, a lot of things, you know, went wrong that you thought going into the year. Oh, if this guy doesn't, you know, produce, or if the goaltender struggles, or if this happens, you think, oh, they're done. They're going to miss the playoffs. It seemed that they had that little depth. But, you know, it just worked out that while some guys played kind of below expectation, other guys played above it, and it all kind of balanced out, I think. So it has been a very interesting year. I think they haven't been dominant all season, just when you watch them. Underlying numbers, you know, ignore that. But just watching them for 82 games, I never thought they were, all that dominant. But I was curious to see what they would look like when they got to the playoffs, just because I think for that team, they're kind of over the regular season a little bit. They've had great regular seasons, and it hasn't amounted to anything in the playoffs. And I think they took a different approach in that way.
It's fascinating to see because, right, if what you're doing is not working, eventually you gotta try something else. And that thing that you mentioned, I think we saw that from the Penguins a little bit this year too. The way they just kind of, for the first 30 games or so, seemed to be kind of like whatever, and then they kind of turned it on. You look at those experienced teams that have done it, and you do see that often. 82 games is a grind. And as we know, the important thing, especially for the Capitals in this Ovechkin era, is what happens in the playoffs. So here they are, and Philip Grubauer starts game one, which that's what I would have done if I was Barry Trotz. I guess what I wonder about is the sort of what now? Can he go back to Holtby if need be, or is he going to live and die with Grubauer?
Yeah, it's a good question. He's going back to Grubauer for game two. He said that today. I think that's the right decision. I don't think he looked, amazing on Thursday night, but I also don't really, you think back to those goals and you don't really blame him for any of that. The Panarin shot at the end was just a really great shot by a really great player. So for at least now, he's sticking with Grubauer. If they fall into an 0-2 series hole, I could see him switching. I don't think he's afraid to go back to Holtby. I think he did that a little bit towards the end of the regular season where he was rotating them. I think he trusts that Holtby, his confidence isn't too frayed, or at least he'd be able to kind of step in and it wouldn't be a disaster. But I think for now, it's soon to make that move.
What's it been like covering Braden Holtby during this incredibly difficult season for him? It's crazy. I look at Carey Price here in Montreal, and he has really sort of similar numbers when it comes to save percentage and goals against. The difference is he lost fully, I think, more than twice as many games as he won this year. What's his demeanor been like? You've had a chance, I'm sure, to get to know him a little bit over the years. What's he been like during this difficult period for him?
Yeah, I think he's been, pretty calm about it all. You never saw this, panic of oh, I've lost myself completely. I don't think it was ever like that. I think he thought even when he was struggling, he was so close. There was just a couple of things that were off, and maybe some games that he played well, but he had lost, and there's just one little different break in that game, and maybe we're not even talking about his rough stretch, and I think he felt pretty, relaxed about everything the entire time. Realistically, he went more than 3 years without ever having a stretch like that. And it was really February when you think about it. He went 2-5-2 with an 800 save percentage and a 4-point-something goals against average. But before that point, he'd always been really, really steady, a 2-time Vezina finalist, and he'd never had any real bumps. And that's amazing. You don't see that anymore with goaltenders. You kind of expect them to have a couple of rough patches here and there, and he hasn't. He's avoided that, and so maybe we all overreacted when it did happen. He was really compounded by the fact that Grubauer was playing really, really well at the same time. But Holtby, to his credit, was very kind of level-headed about it. He kind of took that week that they gave him to reset in early March. When he came back, he did show improvement. He was pretty good down the stretch. It was just kind of hard at that point to ignore, what Grubauer had been doing and kind of his numbers and everything else. So I think Trotz made the right decision, but at least from my perspective, Holtby has handled it really well.
Tomorrow night at 7:30 at Verizon, it's game number 2. Then the series shifts to Columbus for games 3 and 4 at Nationwide. Isabelle, are you psyched to spend a lot of time in Columbus over the next week plus?
Yeah, I actually think Columbus is an underrated city. I really like it there. I was thinking about going to the zoo. There's a Starbucks right next to the rink. A lot of good things. I really enjoy my time there.
And
not a fan.
There's a Tim Hortons, I think, attached. At least there was when I was last there, attached to the rink.
Rink.
Yeah, it's weird. All right, cool. So, well, enjoy it. Thanks for making time for us here on your Saturday. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Cheers. That's Isabelle Khurshudyan of the Washington Post, covering the Capitals. Man, they better win game 2. Now, I understand that their demeanor, as Isabelle is telling us, they seem like they're loose, they're relaxed, but you don't want to go to Columbus down 0-2, especially if you're the Washington Capitals. Like, maybe it's just me, but it just seems like if anyone was going to lose game 1 at home and make everybody worry about them despite being the division winner, it's the Washington Capitals. And the Blue Jackets kind of wanted them, right? They wanted to avoid the Penguins and get the Capitals, which was kind of insulting on some level as well. So I don't know. Well, it's going to be fun to see. I'm looking forward to it. This is a fascinating series with the star power. Panarin, what a player. Alex Ovechkin on the other side. And, geez, if Philip Grubauer loses game 2, do you go back to Braden Holtby? What do you do? Fascinating question to me. So anyway, coming up next, let's talk Leafs. It's been way too long, and we have been ignoring the Toronto Maple Leafs for far too long. How are they going to overcome losing Nazem Kadri? Can they? And do they have an answer for Marchand, Bergeron, and Pasternak? We'll find out from Jonas, Siegal of The Athletic. We're talking Leafs next. This is Hockey Primetime on SiriusXM NHL Network Radio. We're also streaming live at hockeyprimetime.com, on Facebook Live, on YouTube Live, on Periscope. Check us out, man. Thanks for hanging out with us on this Saturday, or perhaps you're on our podcast page at hockeyprimetime.com. We'll be back right after this. For those of you who don't know what centimeters are, that is the equivalent of about 10 inches of snow, which is way more snow than anybody should be getting on April, whatever this is, the 15th or something. Does that sound right? 14th?
It is April the 15th.
It's the 14th, Laura.
Today is the 14th.
Come on.
The snow is going to start tomorrow, which is the 15th.
Pull yourself together here.
And did you get your tires changed this week? Because I never changed my tires until April 30th. Like, that's my personal rule.
I had an appointment on Thursday, and I didn't feel like going, so I changed it to Friday. And then on Friday, I was like, oh, there's going to be a snowstorm. So I called them, and again, I was like, I'm sorry.
There's going to be snow.
Getting my tires changed. There's a snowstorm this weekend. The guy called me a chicken on the phone.
Are you serious?
He called me a chicken.
Does he want you to be driving in freezing rain on Monday?
He was just breaking my balls. He's a good guy. But it's that's a pretty good policy. My buddy, a guy I work with, did it like a couple of weeks ago. He did it in I might have even still been March when he did it, and I was like, you're crazy.
Yeah, man. No, you can't do that in Canada, especially not Montreal.
Well, yeah, Montreal for sure. And Toronto's had kind of a bad winter too. It's just been nasty in the Northeast for the most part. Not that we're complaining. I know that anybody who doesn't live in the northeastern part of the world thinks that we get way too much attention.
Jonas is on the line.
There's way too much time spent talking. And I don't know if you're aware of this, Laura, but a lot of people in Canada feel like the Leafs get an inordinate amount of coverage compared to other teams. I'd counter that by saying I was watching SportsCenter this morning. They did like 8 minutes on the Jets. It was amazing. But it's all about the Leafs tonight. A very weird 8 o'clock Saturday night start for the Leafs and the Bruins. This is a massive game for Toronto. Our next guest is covering the Leafs and that series for The Athletic. A pleasure to welcome back to the show, Jonas Siegal. How you doing?
I'm well. How are you guys?
We're doing great, and it's Saturday night at 8. That's weird, no? Especially for a Leafs game.
Yeah, I think it might have something to do with U.S. TV.
For sure.
It also might have to do with the Raps Wizards, which is at 5:30.
Oh,
maybe, I don't know. It's definitely screwing up my schedule, and I'm sure all the players too.
Yeah, and that's it. It's just the Leafs on Saturday night. You just assume that's a 7 o'clock start. It always has been. Leafs, Bruins, Hockey Night in Canada. Anyway, whatever. It's 8 o'clock tonight, and the Leafs are in a situation here. It's not a shock that they're down 1-0, but now that they've lost Nazem Kadri for 3 games, how big of a loss? How bad is that for the Leafs?
Well, it's a big loss. I mean, he's probably one of their 4 most important players just because he plays, well, for a variety of reasons. He plays a premium position where they're not especially deep. They don't have a lot of guys who can play center beyond the guys who are actually centers. 2, he's a really good two-way player. Like, not only is he a guy who Mike Babcock uses against other top lines, he provides a good chunk of offense. Like, he scored 30 goals for the 2nd straight season. He's also a really important piece of their top power play unit. He plays in the middle. He's kind of that slot guy, and he actually led the team with 12 power play goals during the regular season. So he just is important. And when you take him out, suddenly they have to find another option who can play center. And that means, in this case, Mike Babcock deciding or seemingly deciding to move Patrick Marleau over to the middle. And he hasn't done great there this year. And what happens when you take someone out of position is, your whole lineup gets a little bit less deep. Now, the good news for them is they have this young Andreas Johnson who came up late in the regular season and played really well. So he'll get into the lineup and he can provide a boost, but they just can't make up for the absence of Kadri just because he's become such an important player for them.
Were you surprised he got 3 games?
Yeah, it seemed a little much. Like, I thought certainly he deserves a suspension. I thought 2 games would have even been fair, but we don't see 3 games a lot in the playoffs. And I just don't know. I think that the weird thing with those suspensions is the inconsistency. Like, sometimes we see hits and we're like, there's no way that guy's not getting suspended. And then he doesn't get suspended. And then you see situations like this where you're like, yeah, obviously that's a suspension. Like, he came charging in. That play didn't have to happen. But 3 games in a playoff, we just don't see that now. Like, he does have a little bit of a history. And I wonder if what he said after the game made an impact. He basically said, it was a retaliation for Tommy Wingels hitting Mitch Marner, but I don't think that should matter. Like, I don't think if player safety, and who knows what exactly went into the decision, but if player safety decided that because he was honest and said, I did this to stick up for a teammate, and that's the reason he got 3 instead of 2 or 3 instead of 1, I just don't think that makes a ton of sense. You just want to see consistency, and that's a hard thing to achieve, but this doesn't really feel like a consistent result.
I agree with it. I totally agree with what you're saying. And I guess what I wonder about is, I know it's tough to compare situations, but it's like, was this 3 times worse than what Drew Doughty did the other day? And now you're setting the table, or setting the tone might be a better way for the rest of the playoffs, right? If anything, and I think we probably would agree, something worse than what Nazem Kadri did is going to happen, and it'll probably happen in the first round of the playoffs. What are they going to do then? Like, are they going to give a guy 6 games, 7 games in the playoffs?
Well, and I wouldn't be surprised if it happens in this series. Would you be surprised if Brad Marchand is involved in something, and then, I don't know, then there's no suspension or there's suspension? It just creates a weird bar based on the play. And I don't know, I don't know what the best way to solve the issue is, because every hit is a little bit different. And I just don't know that you see a suspension that long in the playoffs. We were thinking about it over dinner last night from the people here for media. What would that be in the regular season? Are they basically saying that during the regular season that's worth 6, 7, 8 games? I don't know what the equivalent is.
And the other thing, I guess, that does have to be taken into account is that Kadri does have a history, so there's all kinds of things. Who knows? But I'm sure you'd never hear the Department of Player Safety admit this, but I believe 100% if he hadn't have said what he said after the game, that he would have gotten 2 games, and that seems to me,
that's the case. That's silly, right?
Oh, for sure. I mean, this is the Department of Player Safety, right? Silly. That's sort of their thing.
But can I just say, you put yourself in that position. Kadri it's a momentary loss of judgment, but when that happens, you take it out of your hands. So.
Yeah, that's 100% true. And as you mentioned, the only surprising thing is that Brad Marchand, it was Nazem Kadri, not Brad Marchand, who was the first guy suspended in this theory and in this series, I should say. And game 2 goes tonight at 8:00, as we were talking about. So you touched on it a little bit, trying to replace him, and that's a tough thing to do. How many teams can replace a 30-goal scoring center who plays a significant role in a number of situations? So if we could touch back on that a little more in depth, what exactly is Mike Babcock saying? What are they going to do to try to fill the void?
Well, so they're taking Patrick Marleau from the left wing and moving him over to center. And this is something they did in the first half of the year when they had injuries. They missed Austin Matthews for 10 games in the first half. And for most of that time, I think it was 8 of the 10 games, they moved Patrick Marleau over. They also moved Patrick Marleau to center, when Tyler Bozak was struggling and he was dropped to the 4th line. So they have done this before. But what I think is really interesting about it is in the second half, when Matthews was hurt, when Kadri was hurt for a bit, they started using William Nylander at center, and they moved him over. And that was a change in Mike Babcock's approach, because he had kind of looked at Nylander and said, he wasn't ready to play center. He's still learning about the NHL. He still needs to learn kind of what it takes to compete every night, what it takes defensively, what it takes to play without the puck. All these little subtler details, he wasn't quite ready. But in the second half, he used him at center, and he actually performed pretty well. And so I think what's happened is Mike Babcock has kind of gone the safe route tonight in Boston, because it is on the road. He doesn't have control of the matchups. I'm sure he's worried, what will happen if Nylander gets out there for a shift against Bergeron. He can't control the situation as much, but I think what it does, and why I think the better move would have been to use Nylander, is Nylander would have spread them out a little bit more, made them more difficult to match up with, because right now Nylander is going to play again with Austin Matthews. And so Boston can take their top line, take their top defensive pairing, and use them against that line. And what would have happened if they had used Nylander is they could have spread themselves out a little bit, and they could have had Matthews on one line. They could have had Nylander and Marner potentially on another line together. And then I think you force Boston into making some harder decisions. But Mike Babcock seems like he's going to play it safe and use the guy who's played, more playoff games than almost anyone.
Is safe to say that the Bruins got under the Leafs' skin or into their heads in Game 1?
I don't know if I think that's true. I just think what happened in the sense I got from some of the players and the feel you kind of got from the game is the first 10 minutes, they were just completely in over their heads. I think for those first 10 minutes, the shot attempts were 15-1. And you could feel it in the building. It was intense. It was, the crowd was raucous, and you could just feel a team that was kind of overwhelmed a little bit. But after that, the game kind of settled and not much was really happening. And then the Leafs tied it. And then they had a couple power play opportunities, nearly scored, but didn't score. And then the Bruins used their power plays and scored. And the game kind of got away from them. They gave up a late goal in the second period that gave Boston a 2-goal lead. And then in the third, it just completely came undone. So for a stretch of the game, I think they were okay with, but it was the start and kind of the way it finished that really got away from them. And obviously, included in that was the Kadri play.
Right. And as he admitted, I mean, he said that he kind of he was retaliating, and I can understand how one would feel that way. I guess the key thing is in a situation like this is trying to control yourself and take yourself out of the moment for a second. And the other thing that they have to worry about, and the absence of Kadri, I'm sure, is not going to make this any easier. They've got arguably the best line in hockey coming at them the other day, and they were looking pretty darn good there in Game 1. Marchand, Bergeron, and Pasternak. How can they or what can they do to try to at least limit the damage that those guys do?
Well, so that's I think there's two prongs to that. The one big problem for them in Game 1 is their top defensive pair was just destroyed anytime those guys were on the ice. And really in general, Morgan Riley and Ron Hainsey had a really tough night. It didn't go well for them at all. And that line just poses such a big problem for not only them, but the line they're matching up against, which is Toronto's top line with Matthews, Nylander, and Hyman. And basically anytime they were on the ice together, Boston was playing in the offensive zone, because we've seen with that line, we've seen it the last 2 years, and we've seen it with Bergeron and Marchand for so long, is they just control the puck down low so effectively. They're fast, they're strong on the puck. They've got plenty of skill. They've got 3 guys on that line who scored 30 goals during the regular season. They force you to play defense. And so I think, from Toronto's perspective, they're looking at it if we can get them to spend some time in their zone where they're defending, then they're not going to be nearly as effective, obviously, offensively, because they're not going to be playing offense, and they're going to have to defend against us is kind of their mindset. And so, Austin Matthews was talking about it the other day, where they're going to try to get the puck into the Boston zone a little bit more, spread the Bruins out a little bit, and use their skill, use their speed. We've seen it in this matchup between these two teams during the regular season, where when Toronto's speed is apparent, and that line obviously has tons of skill and tons of speed, they can make things difficult. But they just didn't spend any time on offense in Game 1, and it cost them.
Game 2 tonight. It's 8:00 in Boston. You eat anything particularly good in Boston while you've been there?
No, I'm pretty safe. I don't.
Okay. Do you like pizza?
Yeah.
There's a place called Regina Pizza that's not far from the rink. That's very, very good. And they make all kinds of different stuff. You don't need to have anchovies or anything like that. If I could offer a recommendation. Jonas, a pleasure, man. Thanks, and always a pleasure to talk with you.
Anytime.
From Boston, covering the Leafs and the Bruins. Game 2 goes tonight. Are you ready? Are you fired up? Geez, Toronto sports fans. What a life, eh? You've got the Raptors playing Game 1 of their series this evening, I should say, not even tonight. So that's a 5:30 start, and maybe part of the reason why the Leafs are playing at 8. Now, the Leafs are in Boston, but they'll be back home after that game tonight. The Blue Jays season is full swing. Toronto FC is coming off a championship season. They're also headed for the Champions League, the CONCACAF Champions League final. An embarrassment of riches for Toronto sports fans. And that's not even mentioning the lacrosse team, which is always good. The CFL team, which is not something that I particularly care about, but there are people who do. There's a lot of stuff going on there. And the teams are good. That's the other thing. I mean, what do we got here in Montreal? We got a terrible hockey team. We've got a bad football team in the CFL, which, again, I don't care about. And we've got a sort of a mediocre MLS team who Do we know what happened to them? No? They played this afternoon. Anyway, coming up next, let's talk about the New Jersey Devils while we still can. Corey Masisak is covering the Devils for The Athletic. He's going to be joining us next. Is it as simple as this? You stop Hall, you stop the Devils? We'll see if they have an answer for the Lightning and what Corey thinks about it next. This is Hockey Primetime on SiriusXM, NHL Network Radio, and streaming live at hockeyprimetime.com. Had a pretty good game there in game number one. Taylor Hall, that's the first playoff goal of his career in his first ever playoff game. And I think if I'm a betting man right now, I've got my dollars on Taylor Hall winning the Hart Trophy this season. But the question is, did the Devils have enough beyond Taylor Hall to hope to make a series of this against the Tampa Bay Lightning? If you just zone in on Hall, can you essentially beat the New Jersey Devils? Do we have Corey? No. Okay. And that's the thing. You look at the Boston Bruins and the fact that that team can sort of come at you in waves. And this is the thing of the very, very good teams, and the Lightning are another example of this, right? Is if you slow down one line, and you got to zone in on one line, you're going to zone in on Stamkos and Kucherov, or what is it that you're going to zone in on? Whatever it is, they've got another group of guys that can hurt you. I think that's the big question about the Devils is if you stop Taylor Hall, do they have the horses to beat you? And I'm not convinced that they do. So we'll check into that and the goaltending situation there in New Jersey with Corey Masisak in just a few. But yes, the Tampa Bay Lightning handled their business in game number one. That was a 5-2 final. Did I screw that up? I think it was 5-2. It was so long ago. How could I be expected to remember that? And game number two is coming up shortly. Really, we're about 20 minutes from puck drop in Tampa at Amalie Arena between the Devils and the Lightning. And the Devils are going to be hoping to nick one. Hey, listen, all you need to do, and we know this, we all watch hockey, all you need is your goaltender stand on his head. The goalie stands on his head, all of a sudden you're laughing. and you're back home with a 1-1 series lead and 3 of the next 5 potential games at home. Or the other thing is you go back home down 2-0, which is not a situation anyone wants to be in, especially against the Tampa Bay Lightning. I'm a big believer in that championship experience, and the Lightning do have
Corey's
that
on the line
in spades. I know they didn't make the playoffs last year, but that might almost be, in a way, sort of a good thing for the Lightning. I'm sure they didn't want to miss the playoffs. I don't mean to imply that, but the fact that they didn't have the grind of the Stanley Cup last year, I think really helped them this year. And then remember, they're just 2 years removed from almost going all the way. So you got a lot of guys there with experience going up against a reasonably inexperienced New Jersey team that leans heavily on one guy. With more on that, let's bring in Corey Masisak covering this series and the New Jersey Devils for The Athletic. Hello, Corey.
How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you today?
I'm doing great.
Thanks for making time. We appreciate it. And I know game time is right around the corner. So how true is this statement? If you stop Taylor Hall, you stop the Devils.
Well, it's certainly been the case of late. I mean, I think they've had problems all year long, but I mean, the lack of depth scoring has sort of been illuminated even more lately. I mean, even like the other night, Hall had a goal and he had a great assist, and that wasn't, it wasn't going to be enough. They're going to need more from other places. I wrote a thing this morning about how basically if you take out the top line that Taylor Hall is on and you take out the shutdown line that Travis Zajac runs, the other 2 lines, all of those forwards combined have scored fewer goals than Taylor Hall since February 1st.
Who would you single out as somebody who needs to sort of step it up offensively if they want to do this?
Yeah, they need. I mean, they really need. Oh, sorry. They really need the second. I mean, they're not what you would call the second line. Is it's Pavel Zacha, Miles Wood, and Pat Maroon, or at least it has been the past few games. It may change here in a few minutes. But they really need those guys. That's 3 very offensive minded players. They really just obviously the Lightning are an amazingly deep team, so they're not going to be able to match them line for line in that way. But those 3 guys especially, they probably need more from somebody on the defense end that's not Sami Vatanen gave them a ton of minutes, and Will Butcher looked pretty good the first game, but that's part of it too, is they were really struggling to get into the offensive zone and kind of keep the puck there for long stretches in game 1. So it's as with a lot of things, there's a combination of things that need to happen better in game 2 than they did in game 1.
We're about 15 minutes away from the New Jersey Devils and the Tampa Bay Lightning, and that's at Amalie Arena before the series shifts back to Prudential Center in Newark. The Devils and the Lightning in their best-of-7 first-round series, and yeah, you mentioned that depth for Tampa. There's very few teams that can sort of go toe-to-toe with a team like that. And Keith Kincaid, I guess, is going to have to do the job. They're still starting Keith Kincaid in goal, correct?
Yeah, I think it would be hard to necessarily pin any of those goals on him the other night. I mean, I think honestly that's been the biggest thing that he has given them over the past month and a half or so is he just hasn't really given up a bad goal. I was kind of going back through some of the goals he gave up in the last 8 or 9 games of the season, and it's just, I mean, he's making he makes some highlight reel saves here and there too, but it just being sturdy and not giving up the bad one at the worst time has really been, the big. I mean, and granted, maybe they're going to need more than that from him. Maybe they are going to need him to just absolutely try to steal the series for them. But to this point, at least, if they can at least start with no bad goals, that's at least a start.
And what's the story with Cory Schneider exactly?
Yeah, he got hurt and he came back, and he has certainly not admitted that there is anything wrong physically, but it has looked at times like maybe he's just, I mean, for goalies, right? If you're at 94%, that might not be enough some nights. So, we'll see what happens. I think after the season is over, maybe we'll find out some more information on him. But, he just hasn't. It's not even necessarily that he has played poorly in every game. It's just they haven't really been able to rely on him. To give them whatever, even 28 out of 30 or 32 out of 35, something, just something to give them a chance. I'm sure they would have maybe even liked him to win the job back over the final stretch of the season. But the couple opportunities that he got, it was kind of more of the same that he had given them in January and February.
Do you feel for him as your fellow Cory with no E?
Yeah, I did. One of the first days on the job, I was walking down the hallway away from a bunch of fans, and he was walking towards me, and I heard them yelling, Cory, come sign this. And I looked at him, I said, I don't think they're yelling at me.
Right. And Kincaid, to get back to Keith Kincaid, that's a hell of a story. And the fact that at 28 years old, he's sort of, in a way, appears to have sort of stolen Cory Schneider's job. And he seems like a really cool guy. What can you tell me about him?
He's very laid back. He's very, he's definitely, if you were going to pick out guys who just seem like they like to have the most fun in the locker room, I would put him near the top of the list for sure. It seems like, things just sort of roll off of him, good or bad. He's not really, it doesn't seem like the success that he's suddenly found has really affected him in any way. John Hines has mentioned a couple of times, like, look, this isn't like, he didn't just sort of luck into some playing time here. This isn't just like a light bulb just went on. They really sort of kind of sat him down and said, look, we need you to practice harder. We need you to, work out harder in the off season. They basically came out and said, like, you needed to, make some off ice changes. And to his credit, he's done that, and he's gotten an opportunity this year. And, he's another example of how there's 100 guys out there that can do this crazy job of being an NHL goaltender if they just get the right opportunity at the right time and the puck bounces their way.
It's true. And all those guys, the backups and others, it's almost like the William Karlsson thing where you're like, wow, how many other guys like that are there out there that are just sort of waiting in the wings for their opportunity? And I bet you there's more than one goaltender who could probably do the job who isn't getting the opportunity or is just not in the right spot on the depth chart. Hey, before I let you go, they got a tough draw here in the first round. They ended up a wild card team, and I think a lot of us were surprised the Devils were as good as they were out of the gates this season. They were leading the division for a long stretch this year as well. How do you think you balance the expectations and the fact that they exceeded them for a large part of this season, and now here they are in the playoffs against a tough team? How do you evaluate the season at this point?
Yeah, I think the best way to put it is, if this series goes the way that the vast majority of people think, and they don't win it, I think the fan base is going to be disappointed. I think the players are going to be disappointed. I'm sure that once we get into the off season and there's some time to reflect on it, though, they will see the season as a success. I mean, this was, they've liked to tell everyone that they know how many different media organizations picked them to finish last or second to last in the Eastern Conference. And so that's been with them the whole year. And the fact that they've even gotten into the playoffs is obviously a huge achievement. And, they're getting some valuable playoff experience for all their kids and all of that. But, it was, they were in a playoff spot every day of the season, which is crazy to think, because it seemed like they were, they spent the last month of the season fighting for their lives, but they remained in the top 8 though every day. So, yeah, they're kind of playing, to me, from the outside, they're kind of playing with house money right now, but I don't think they necessarily see it that way. And I'm sure it seems like some of the fan base doesn't see it that way. But yeah, I can't see, regardless of how the next 3 to 6 games go, I can't see this as anything other than a big success for them.
And the experience that guys like Miles Wood, Nico Hischier, Pavel Zacha, Jesper Bratt, Will Butcher, all these young guys are getting here, regardless of what happens in this playoff series, I think it's going to be invaluable for them going forward. And I know we have a lot of Devils fans who listen to the show, and I urge you guys to be careful outside the rink. Cory, thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Yeah, anytime. Thanks for having me again.
That's Cory Masisak of The Athletic. Colorado, the news just gets worse. Samuel Girard is out of the lineup. That's not good. And one of the big pieces that they picked up in that blockbuster trade that they made earlier this year, moving Matt Duchene out and bringing a number of guys in. Did you see Girard? And this was, I guess it was last Saturday night in that last game of the season where they qualified for the playoffs. Pretty classic game. But Gerard, the move that he put on, I'm trying to remember who it was. Somebody's chasing him down, and Gerard just loses him, and the guy bails and goes head first into the boards. It was very, very impressive stuff, although a little bit of luck involved there as well. So what are we going to do next? Let's do it. We're going to do your final NHL awards. It's over. The season is over. We have to choose a Hart Trophy winner. Who is the Hockey Primetime pick for the Hart Trophy? Find out next. Ahead of coverage, live coverage of the Stanley Cup playoffs coming up in just a few minutes. This is Hockey Primetime here on SiriusXM, NHL Network Radio, and streaming live at hockeyprimetime.com. Devils, right? Nobody expected them to do anything this year. And in fact, I think a lot of us thought they were going to be really bad. They didn't really make very many moves and change and turn over the roster that much from the team that did as badly as they did a year ago. And yet here they are in the Stanley Cup playoffs. A glimmer of hope for inept general managers everywhere. So we did tease it, and I will say it. Your official Hart Trophy pick for this season, I got to give it to Taylor Hall of the New Jersey Devils. And I will give an honorable mention. I don't know why, and we did bring this up on the show last week, why nobody has mentioned this guy. But we saw him score an overtime winner in the playoffs the other night. Artemi Panarin is amazing. And this guy has he's silenced anybody who was a critic of this guy, saying, hey, maybe he's a product of playing with Patrick Kane. And we knew he was good. I don't know if we knew that he was great. But a point-a-game player and over a point-a-game player this season, a guy who had very similar numbers to Taylor Hall and a similar margin between him and the second highest scoring player on his team, and there they are in the playoffs. But for some reason, nobody talked about Artemi Panarin. So I'm giving an honorable mention to my friend Artemi Panarin. And Claude Giroux makes the ballot as well. That's the big three, but I got to give it to Taylor Hall. And yes, Eastern Conference bias shining through at its brightest there. No Anse Kopitar. Who else? William Karlsson maybe deserves some love for that team. Weird that the best team in hockey didn't have a candidate, the Nashville Predators. They're going to be playing next, looking to take a 2-0 series lead. Tonight, it's the Leafs and the Bruins. So Leafs fans, I wish you guys the best. The best of luck to your team tonight. It's going to be a tough one, especially without Nazem Kadri. For Laura Saba, the producer of the show, our executive producer is Sam Wu. Technical producer is Jesse Ralph at SiriusXM NHL Network Radio. My name is Conor McKenna, and I'm already excited to talk to you next week. Enjoy the rest of the weekend. Enjoy all the games.
Great show, man.